Aloha, everyone. Thank you for joining me and former Congresswoman Pat Saiki today to talk about the Congresswoman's new book, A Woman in the House. My name is Denby Fawcett. I'm a columnist for Honolulu Civil Beat, and I first met Pat Saiki in 1955 in territorial Hawaii when she came to my school, Punahou School, where I was a fifth grader, to be our PE teacher.
That's right.
And, Pat Saiki has had many challenges in her life, but I think we were one of her first challenges because me and my lazy friends did not like PE at all. We'll talk about that later. But first of all, welcome, Pat, and thank you so much for doing this, for meeting with us about your just remarkable book. I got to hold it up for everyone to see, A Woman in the House. And, it's amazing when you think back to 1955 to think that we're meeting now in the middle of a global pandemic, meeting in cyberspace. Who would have known that? And who would have known that
That's true.
Become a congresswoman and become a presidential cabinet member. So
that's right.
Very proud of everything that you've done. But first of all, to start off, I'd like to show some pictures that we could discuss that show you in the early days of your life and have some show some things that people may not know about you that I find very interesting. So these are your grandparents on the Fukuda side. And can you tell me about your family coming from Japan, both sets of grandparents?
Yeah, both grandma and grandpa were initially brought over to Hawaii to work in the cane fields. And so they signed an agreement with the Hilo Sugar Company, and they got a piece of property up in Hawaii Street, and they worked to grow sugarcane and sell the cane to the Hilo Sugar Company. Now, Grandma and Grandpa were part of a community of workers. And interestingly, the workers were lived in camps. There was a Japanese camp and a Portuguese camp and a Filipino camp, but they were, according to their background, where they came from, and they worked with each other to survive. And Grandpa and Grandma did very well in forming what they call a kumiai with the other neighbors, and they worked the cane fields. They were very, shall we say, conservative. And Grandma especially had her ideas of what a woman should be all about. So I got my first lessons not to wear shorts because that's much too exposure to too much. And I mustn't climb trees. Girls don't do that. Ojo-sans don't do that. And always sit on the lower side of the table, the ocean side, because men sit on that mountain side, the higher side. And you always walk 3 steps behind the men. And all these basic Japanese traditions she wanted honored by me. So I said, yes, Grandma, yes, Grandma, yes, Grandma. And but I enjoyed them a lot because they knew how to cook in an open fire, cook rice in an open fire. And they had furo, where you sat in the tub with nice warm water. And they provided for me a very strong base, a background of tradition. And not that I observed all of it, but I did take everything they had into consideration as I grew up.
I'd like to show you now in your shorts, which is how I met you. And
there I am.
When you came to Punahou, as I mentioned earlier, we were the laziest people in the world. My girlfriends and I, and our idea of athletics was riding our horses in Kapiolani Park and going to the beach. And you came in and you wanted us to play soccer and to learn all these competitive sports. And what worked for us, you eventually won us over by one, your beauty. You had this dark hair, and you always, as you're shown here now, wore pure white. You had a whitely pressed blouse and shark skin shorts, which is a kind of a gabardine, very nice fabric. And you won us over by cajoling us and by what we call in Hawaii, ho'omali mali. And in a way, that's kind of been your career, your life in politics. You've been very successful at reaching over both sides and cajoling people. And you use a lot of humor in your delivery, which we loved as children.
Well, I tell you something though. It was an honor for me to teach at Punahou School. And there's a whole story about that, because Punahou at the time had only mainland teachers on their faculty. No local people were on their faculty. Sure, they had maybe piano teachers and outside contract teachers, but not staff, not faculty. And John Fox, heaven, God bless him, had another thought in his mind. He thought that Punahou should expand its horizons and bring in local people to be part of the faculty so that they'll be part of the community. And so he wanted to find some people who would meld in and maybe work through the integration. And he came up to the university and interviewed me. I was still a junior in college. And that's another story that I have to share with you one day. But he asked me to consider being on the faculty of Punahou after I graduated. Now, I got a job to be a teacher at Punahou before I even had my degree. So I thought that was really not only a pleasure, but an honor. And so I naturally worked hard and got my degree and qualified as a teacher to come to Punahou to work with you young people. And you all were a challenge to me, because you're right. You all had these high mucky muck ideas, of how you were going to entertain yourselves. And the fact is that I did have a, shall we say, physical background in the sense of sports. My father was the one that had each of us who were girls. He had only had 3 girls. He called each of us Sunny Boy, and he brought us up learning to play tennis because he was a tennis coach, and he was a good one too. So he trained each of us in tennis, and we excelled. And it was natural for me to go into physical education because of the exposure that I had to physical activities. But I went on from there, of course. After teaching physical education, I went on to teaching all other subjects. But the Punahou experience was a good one. And I remember you naughty little kids. And I remember how I had to work real hard to get you to understand that participating in sports was very important.
Well, you taught us, I think, what your dad taught you, which was a message you kept in your mind through your whole life, that, sports is a metaphor for life. And you taught us that it's not just about playing, it's what you're going to learn when you get beaten by people.
Right.
Yeah,
competing.
To that
and competing.
Competing. And you're so smiling here, and you look so innocent, but you were a cutthroat competitor and a tennis champion.
That's right.
And your dad brought you up like that to win.
That's right, to win.
Very important. He didn't want you in the background.
I call him the original feminist. He was more of a feminist than anybody else at the time. He felt that each of us could do anything we wanted to do, no matter whether we were a girl or a boy. We can pursue anything, be good at anything if we tried and worked hard at it. So he was an inspiration.
Then in this next picture, there shows you in another, like you see you as that super jock in the last picture.
Yeah.
This is the Kapalapala pageant, a beauty pageant.
Oh, I can't believe it.
You don't seem beauty pageant type to me. What
Yeah,
inspired you to do that? You won, so
yeah, my friends at Halilau Lima, which was the girls' dormitory, they convinced me that I should run for this position as Kabbalah queen. It was on ethnic
yeah.
choices. So I was a Japanese queen. I, my parents didn't think I'd have a chance to win. I mean, after all, I'm just a kid from Hilo, you know. My mother actually made that gown for me without a fitting because she lived in Hilo and we couldn't afford plane trips, go back and forth to fit the gown. She had my measurements, but we had no fitting. She made the gown. I put it on. It fit perfectly. And they couldn't even come over to watch the contest, partly because they couldn't afford it, but partly because they didn't think I was going to win after all. You know, surprise, surprise.
I like to show the next picture because it shows what this got you into. You know, people think, oh, beauty
Right.
contests, but actually they can be a great opportunity. And you landed this fabulous job
Oh,
as a
yes.
flight
Oh,
attendant.
the win as Kapalapala Queen opened all kinds of doors for me. One of them is the job at Punahou. That's how I got to meet and know John Fox, the principal and CEO of Punahou School. But also, Rudy Tong came up to the university to look us over, and he was starting TPA Aloha Airlines at the time. And he needed some college girls to take over on weekends, holidays, and when the volcano erupted. So, hey, it's perfect. I can make my money and pay my own way through college because I had my sister June. This is a picture of my sister June, who wanted to go to college on the mainland, and we couldn't afford that. So I said, look, I'll work. I'll go to school and I'll work. I can get a job, you know, with Aloha Airlines. I'll pay my own way, support you. You go ahead. And it opened up that door. And then also, uh, I had an offer to do modeling for Ritz stores at the time, Ritz stores. And they hired me to model their clothes and they paid for all of my wardrobe. And that took care of that. And so I had many opportunities. I'm grateful for the help that I received.
And Rudy Tong, I think you told me this, and I might have heard it from someone else. He started that airline because of discrimination. And this is the territory of Hawaii. This myth of a melting pot is just,
That's right.
it's a myth. It's not
Yeah.
true. And there was so much discrimination against
That's right.
Asian American people.
That's right.
Didn't
But you know what else though? It was a very, shall we say, great opportunity for people like me because it opened the doors, took away the question of the demographics and the biases. But also, when the volcano erupted in those days, the airplanes, the pilots could go fly into the crater. No, they can't do it anymore. But in those days, we could take the passengers in the plane and fly right into the Halimau crater to see the eruption. And we got double pay for that. And that was, double pay.
Dad told me about that. He did that, and he said that your feet felt hot in the plane.
Yeah.
Close to the fire. I mean, you couldn't do that today.
Oh, yeah, you can't do that today.
Opportunities. We had many adventures that now, due to lawsuits, they never allow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you can't do that.
No.
And my parents, of course, squeezed every time the volcano erupted because they knew that I would be on that plane.
Yeah.
And so they worried. But it paid my way. And
for June too.
The opportunities were there for me. And I'm grateful to people like Rudy Tong, who moved on, of course, and Aloha Airlines grew to a very significant airline.
And another thing that happened while you were in the State House was the Equal Rights Amendment. Putting that onto our Constitution and passing also 25 bills that affected women. And it would be good for you to discuss a few of them because I think young women today don't know how really awful it was. And I grew up in that era.
I don't think women.
Credit card.
Yeah, I don't think women today really understand how things work, or they take it for granted, or they may remember, but then they'll forget it. But they could, at that time in 1970, the late 60s and the early 70s, they couldn't get a credit card in their own name. You couldn't go to a bank and open an account and own a home. You couldn't get a loan in your own name. You always had to have your husband or your father's name in order to be able to function in the financial world. It was such discrimination that it was cruel. It really was. And there was no way that women could move financially or economically to advance themselves. There were many other laws. A woman who, for instance, worked all her life for the state government, earned a pension, and died, did not have to, her pension did not necessarily go to her husband. But if a man died, that money would go to the family. But if a woman died, the state takes it. I mean, that is unfair. That had to be changed. There are 25 bills of that nature that Pat Putman, God bless her, she was the one that did the research for me, because I said, let's look at all the laws that we have on the books now and see which ones are discriminatory. And then let's draft bills to correct those. So she found 28 of them. So I introduced them all. And of course, they didn't pass under my name because of the so-called rule that we have that no minority bill can pass. And so they were cockroached by meaningful Democrats. I give them a little grace here. And to me, it was the essence of the legislation that passed that was more important to me than the credit of who introduced it. So even if the bill was introduced by a Democrat, it was identical to the one I had, they voted down my bill and bring that person's bill up, I voted aye, because it was the bill that was important, not who was introducing it. But 25 of them passed.
You always like news reporters. You've always been nice to them, and they like you too. And what the reporters did when you didn't get credit for these 28 bills, 25 of which passed, they wrote stories about it.
That's right. The reporters.
Yeah.
You were one of them, and so was Jerry Keir and Richard Boreka and Floyd Takeuchi and Doug Boswell, and so many of them were all open-minded and thinking, and they gave credit where credit was due.
We're like you. We don't like, reporters don't like unfairness. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. Too. But
another,
many of them are afraid to differ, and they go along. Oh, one more thing that I'm very proud of, that we very rarely discuss openly, and that is the Title IX bill that passed national. Pat Saiki had a lot to do with this one, and it passed the federal Congress. That's fine, but any federal law that passes doesn't automatically get interpreted and implemented by the state. So it was up to us at the state level to implement the essence and the intent of Title IX. And that's what I am very proud of. I worked very hard to change our funding mechanism so that we not only had an athletic department for men, and a subgroup would be a women's athletic program. Instead, we should have a men's program and a women's program. And as we have a men's athletic director, we shall have a women's athletic director. And the budget will include specifically that the women's athletic program will be set up in every school. And that includes the showers and all of the amenities that go with being an athlete. And that was easy to sell. That was wonderful. I would go to the man and I say, look, if this were your daughter, this were again your cousin or aunt, whoever, do you want that person to always be under the thumb of the men's program, depending on whether they make money as to whether they're going to allow women to have athletic facilities? Oh, no, no, no. Well, then sign this bill because we'll create it. And so Donna Thompson was then named as the first women's athletic director, and that program took off. She was very successful, so that the Rainbow Wahinis today are champions. And if anything, and I can't say specifically, but they're making a lot more money in some instances than the men's program is. So, they're paying for themselves. And it was something that had to be done. And it was done under duress, under circumstances, but again, with cooperation, like you said.
Well, one thing that you did, you persuaded the men about having equal facilities, some of which someone's just written in the questions that there's still problems about the facilities.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But another thing you did persuade men to do, and it's again your skill at persuasion, which makes a good politician, was women that had been sexually abused during my era were treated like criminals, like
Oh, yes.
they that were bad, and that the
Yes.
perpetrator, never mind.
That's right.
Women like they deserved it or something.
That's right.
But I'd like you to explain what you did to
Okay.
make that more fair.
Yeah, those women who were abused, raped, or beaten were taken to the morgue to be inspected by the physician at the morgue. Why the morgue? Because the police would work with the morgue and determine what actually happened. So a woman was considered not a victim. The woman was considered part of the perpetrator. Now, my dear husband told me about this. Said, do you know that that's what they do? I said, no, you're kidding. They don't do that, do they? He said, oh, yes. All the women who are raped go to the morgue. So let me tell you, Pat, what we've done. Dick Darby, who was then chief of the CEO of Kapiolani Hospital, Dick Darby and I got together and we have created what we call a sex abuse center. And we feel that instead of the women being taken to the morgue, they should be brought over to Kapiolani Hospital, where we have doctors and nurses who are sympathetic and will treat these people as they should be, like victims. And that's what we would like to do. I said, oh, good, that's great, good. I'd be supportive of that. He said, yeah, that's good, but we need money. So I said, well, then you've come to the right source. I'll sell this for you, no question about it. So again, I went down to the floor of the house. And I said, if this were your daughter or your wife or your aunt, would you want her to be taken to the morgue? Oh, God, no, heavens, no. Sign the bill, sign the bill. It passed without any dissension at all. It was the easiest program to set up. And I tell you something, it has grown statewide now. It's not just Oahu, but statewide. And it's miraculous how things catch on. People understand then what we've been doing all along. It's how they have demeaned women without really thinking about it. And do you know, in the law, a woman who was abused could not have the opportunity to sue, even if it were her own husband? I mean, there's no way that she had any possibility of taking this case to court because she was not the victim. And we had to change that. So we amended the law and made it fair. But that's one of the 25 bills that passed.